Mrs. Leslie Roach, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. It's really an honor, and I'm sure people heard in the intro, but you were really part of my education life. You were so important to me in my high school journey, and for the people that don't know, like, you were my math teacher in 9th grade. And we just have stayed close our entire life. You're now the principal of Northwood High School, which is, at that time when I graduated high school, I was the third graduating class, so very a new school. You were really young, probably just a handful of years older than me at that time. And we've just remained friends and close over so many years, and it's just been a pleasure. And I'm super honored that you're here and excited to talk about all these different things we're going to talk about today. So really sincerely welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. You were an easy student to connect with. So
I don't know if I was that easy, but definitely it was.
Grow up into an adult.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So I guess I'd like to talk about sort of your journey first. I know you were a young educator when we first met, and I'd love to talk to us about your journey and how you got to where you are now. You're now the principal of the school, very involved in the education curriculum and administration in the district, and a really loud voice in a proponent for students and revolutionizing education in the district. And so it's been fun to engage with you on those topics over the last year or so, but just share with us sort of your journey in the last couple decades.
Yeah, probably I actually was younger than you when I taught you, just to start there. I started as a teacher right out of college. So I was 21 when I had my first gig. I was a middle school teacher. I started in middle school and then returned to Irvine where I grew up, and then spent a couple years at a middle school here, and then moved to Northwood High School as a math teacher. Then I got involved in sort of the other aspects of school besides teaching. I was the activities director. I did some coordinating of special committees and reports and things like that before I became an assistant principal. And then I became the principal of Northwood High School 15 years ago. I was 30 years old, I think, at the time.
Running a school with how many students?
2,200.
Wow.
Yeah. And here I am, 15 years later, a lot older, maybe more wise, maybe not, definitely more flexible, with a much greater perspective on probably education as well as life.
Was that always your ambition to be the principal of a school, or did that just happen?
No, it just happened. I think a combination of opportunity and, I think when you're young, probably you sort of think that you could do it. You have the answers to do it. And then as you get older, you realize that no one really knows what they're doing.
Is running a school a lot is running a school a lot like running a company or running a business? I mean, you still are students sort of like, I wouldn't say they're employees, but they got their own challenges. They need to stay motivated. They got their own tracks, career tracks, what have you. It's an organization.
Right. I think it's a really big organization. We have over 150 people who are employed here. And then we have 2,200 students and all their parents. So I think it's probably like running a business in that I have employees, that I have the same challenges that anybody has with employees, the same challenges and opportunities, I'd say. We hire, we fire, we discipline, we encourage, we coach, we do all those kinds of things. I think what's interesting about schools is that the client is the student, but the client is also the parent and the community, because Our mission is obviously to create the best possible learning environment for students and to do right by them, whatever that looks like, however, with whatever they're coming in with and whatever their post-secondary dreams are. But you also have a responsibility, a larger responsibility to the community, because public education specifically is intended to be a community, it's for the community. And in California, it is intended to be reflective of the community and the needs of building such community. So it's not always responding to a client like what they want. Sometimes what we are doing for students is teaching them something that is, or doing things with them that is not what they want, but in their best interest, maybe.
Meaning that it may not be in their best. I'm not sure if I understand. So it may not be in their best interest, or it may not be something that they think they want. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Or they may not want it at all. Wow. So I guess when I think about businesses, oftentimes you have a client that maybe you're selling something to, and you're kind of doing whatever in some ways they want. Maybe, I assume, because I've never worked in a business. My client is a student, but they don't really know what they want or what they really need. So sometimes you're trying to sell them something that is based on what a whole community needs. So, I'm a public school educator. I have a responsibility to not only help kids get to where they want to be, but I also have a responsibility to our community to create good citizens who are community minded, who are politically active and knowledgeable, that, understand how their actions impact the rest of the world, whether it's their family, their community. I have to make them employable, I hope. No, I don't hope. I have to make them employable. So sometimes the things that they want for themselves after high school are not necessarily in conflict with what they have to do as a public high school student, but they maybe don't always see that as part of what they want us to do as a school.
How has education changed? I graduated in 2004, so it's been almost 2 full decades. What are the big fundamental pillars that have changed in education since, let's say, early 2000s when you got into the education system and now?
Yeah. I think that the biggest change probably is we actually have in California a change in standards. So the state dictates what specific skills and content is included in grade level and by discipline. So some of those things have changed. Definitely, I think that we have moved away from trying to cram a whole bunch of content on students, whether that's science or history. Less details probably of every fact, date, all those kinds of things. Knowing that in this world, kids can access computers, they have cell phones, they can access a lot of those facts. They used to have to either memorize or look up in, this is probably before your time, but like in the encyclopedia.
No, I remember that was my time. Those are our times. Yeah, for sure.
So I think there's definitely more of an emphasis on using facts, knowing what facts, being a better consumer of information. So knowing when you're reading something, especially on the internet, whether it's a reliable source or not. And then on the other side of that, what are you going to do with that information? So a huge focus is teaching kids to think, to critically think, and to communicate and to be consumers of information so that they can do something useful with it. And while I think that was always a focus, and actually really a focus at Northwood, I think that it's become more obvious that that's more critical for our students.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what's happening in the education system today, but I definitely can see that, we definitely learned and memorized a lot of facts, but that was just the time. We were still studying in books. iPhone didn't even exist at that time. Like, the world was really a different place. We were studying history and remembering biographies and people and like things that may today, like somebody's like, oh, who's that? Let me just Wikipedia it or Google it or what have you.
Right.
And I think about,
and when information, it wasn't as accessible.
It's accessible.
So in some ways, you had to memorize and have a baseline of the information in order to be able to use that information. So the accessing it was much slower than it is now. Now they can do that quickly. So the expectation of what they can do with it on the other side is larger.
Is the integration of that access pretty open and transparent in school nowadays? Like, what I mean by that is, we talk about like cell phones. All kids have cell phones, and that's pretty transparent to be able to use the cell phone in and out of class, like completely it's integrated in the education process? Or it's like, nope, leave your cell phone at the door? Like, because how do you manage that process? Because it's a mess. It's like connected to their hand now.
Yeah, same with employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a interesting tension, to be honest. And I think that even COVID and all of the time we were at home and distance learning and doing those things taught us some things. I think there was a time that we were really like, hey, we can't control these phones. These kids, it's just part of them. We have to get used to it. I think when you were in high school, it was the graphing calculator that was the bane of high school math teachers' existence. It was the games, storing equations, and we were running around like clearing calculators before every test.
We really did that. You're right.
Yeah. Snake. Kids used to say snake.
Yeah. Snake, Pong. We played Pong. I mean, that's only 15 years ago. If you think about it, like how much technology has changed. We were playing Pong on graphic calculators, and you erased our calculator before a math test. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Right. And now, and then, to be honest, I think it reached a point where the cell phones were too much in classrooms. And there are studies to suggest that kids and employees and adults it's a distraction when you talk about multitasking or the ability for people to do to really focus on what they need to do. Their phone is a distraction, whether it's turned upside down and sitting right next to them or in their pocket or put away. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's there is a distraction. So we have these little cell phone pockets, and the kids all put their phone in the pocket when they come into class. And in some ways it's become a relief for kids because, one, the expectation that they remain connected to their friends or their parents or whoever isn't there. And there's not the same pressure where if you have your cell phone, but I don't, then you're making lunch plans without me. No one has their cell phone. So I think that it's kind of a relief for them. However, they all have a Chromebook or their own device that they're bringing to school. So I think the idea is when they need that information, it's super accessible to them, but it's not. The phones have a different problem that we had to contend with.
And we can go ahead.
I sit in meetings where I also have to tell employees to put their phones away. So
yeah, don't we all? I mean, but it's a problem that I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's a situation that is probably not going to get any better. And like you said, it changes differently as technology evolves. One of the things that I remember really vividly is, Northwood is one of the best schools in California. It's in Irvine. It's a very prestigious school, and it's a public school, but it has a lot of competition. It's a community that test taking and which school you went to was super important. People are really ambitious at a really young age, and also with a lot of parental pushing, if you will. Like, people had strong aspirations, and it was a very competitive school. And growing up in that environment, I think that for us, and I know this is true for like my small little circle of friends, like it made us better students. It made us more ambitious. We became diligent, like you said earlier about, citizenship. Like we became diligent citizens in the world. And we participated well, in my perspective. But there's also consequences to that type of mindset. So how do you guys address that, or what's going on nowadays in terms of how people think about getting into the best schools in the world, or getting the best grades, or the highest test scores, and just fitting in a box, if you will?
Yeah. And I think there is a level of competition and expectation for students, from families, from themselves, from a school, that is really healthy and part of life. And I think, all of us in our adult lives experience stress. If you're successful, you're probably working very hard, and you're thinking about your job a lot, and all of that kind of was your experience in high school is part of being an adult as well. I think it's been a little bit out of whack, to be honest, for our students. And I think that maybe from the time that you graduated to now, there's a lot more, like, social media is a much bigger influence on people's lives. And that idea where you're looking into someone else's life or what they're putting out has created some anxiety in people, because they're looking at their friend from college whose their son's going off to UCLA, or their daughter's off to Harvard. And I think it's created and while that's happening, where people are seeing more of what's happening and have more access to other people's lives, at the same time, there are companies that are making money off preparing students for college. And whether that's SAT, ACT prep, which has always kind of been a thing, but tutoring, to college counselors who you can pay to market your student, to
there's an entire ecosystem of people who are benefiting from this stress.
Yeah, who are making money basically on, maybe in a positive way, but sometimes on the anxiety of a parent and whether or not their kid will get into college. So you hear parents say things like, oh, if my kid doesn't play club baseball in 7th grade, they'll never make or 5th grade even, they'll never make the high school baseball team. And because there's all this economy around all these kind of aspects of preparing kids for their future, it's created an anxiety and a frantic feeling for parents where they don't have accurate information in order to be able to discern what's real. And it's created a lot of anxiety for our parents and our kids, and then our kids, or sometimes our kids and our parents, sometimes one or the other. But so as a school, probably 10 years ago, maybe, we started really talking about this. And at first we thought that it was an issue of kids not looking at other colleges out of the UCs. And because we live in California and we are a high performing school, UC, UCLA, Cal, those are sought after schools and big schools that have a big influence. UCI, they have a big influence on the state of California, and they are public schools. And that's where most kids, when they come into high school, will say, I'm going to go to UCLA. I'm going to go to Cal.
Sure.
And so at first we thought we needed to show kids that there are more colleges out there. And there are, a million of them. There are so many colleges in the United States. And so our first effort was really to get at, okay, like you can look at other options. There are other schools. University of Oregon's a great school. U of A is a great school. Other states do have schools. But I think as we got into it, what we started to realize is, one, parents have misinformation that's perpetuated oftentimes by an industry making money off of them. But also the idea of getting into college is a huge mystery. And that is really difficult for parents. And I would liken it to when you're trying to get a job, you don't know who you're up against. You don't really know what they're looking for. I mean, you see a job description, but you don't know if they want somebody who has experience, doesn't have experience, they want a mold, whatever. And so you're working really hard into this kind of black hole of, I don't even know what I'm really supposed to be doing. And you're just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to hit every check.
So you do everything. Your response is to do everything.
Right. And by the way, it better all be dang perfect. Otherwise, you're living in this fear that it might be my B+ in this class that's going to ruin my future. Or I didn't have 50 hours of community service. I only had 49. So there's all these weird pressures and formulas.
So backwards. So backwards.
Yeah. And I think even colleges are starting to see that that's not what they want. They don't want kids to come to them like that. They also have an interest in bringing in interesting scholars that are going to do well for their schools. And I think we have tried hard to redirect our kids and our parents to, one, there are healthy habits that will make your student more successful while they're here, including sleep, which has been a huge campaign of ours. When kids, and there's a ton of research to support this as well. If kids don't get 8 to 10 hours of sleep, their brains don't develop. And what I don't want is a bunch of weird kids. I don't want a bunch of kids leaving our school and they're weird because they didn't sleep enough when they were in high school.
That's true for adults too, by the way, right?
Yes, it is true for adults too.
Yeah.
I think everybody here at my school benefits when I have enough sleep. Much nicer.
Exactly. Everybody wins.
Right. But I think what we've tried to do is appeal to our students and our parents to explain, like, hey, sleep is a good example that our kids who sleep and get the appropriate amount of sleep, they learn better, their attendance is better, they're better humans, they're nicer to their parents. I mean, teenagers are by nature kind of nasty little humans to their parents, at least not to us usually. But I have to change a culture of, I'm not sleeping because I believe I'm doing all of these things to get into college. So where's the balance for a parent and a kid? They're trying to decide, where's the balance of I need to do this to get into college, but then I'm going, oh, but you really need to sleep. And it's hard for parents to reconcile. It's hard for kids to reconcile. But then, so we try to show them research of like, hey, this is the kids who sleep this much and this much at our school, and this is how they perform. And, to be honest, fit of college is such a huge thing. There are colleges for all kids. They don't all belong at UCLA or Harvard or Stanford. Some kids don't thrive in a big school, not because they don't have the same ability to achieve as the kids who are sitting in those classes, but that's just not what they don't thrive there. But getting parents to sort of see that, and kids graduate from lots of different undergrad programs and they go on to do lots of great things. I'm doing a lot of trying to convince in varying degrees of success. I think one thing we've learned in the last couple of years is we have to start parents younger to really understand that, because by the time they get to us in 9th grade, it's too late, to be honest. It's hard to change habit.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I mean, I also think about like how parents learn how to parent, and the way that parents are prepared to parent today's children are so different than I think the way that my parents had the opportunity to parent us. Information was different. The availability of access to information was different. You talked about Instagram and like all the social media and the comparison and the anxiety that creates. Like, man, parents today have like almost no chance. And then you have this system, this economy of people who are making money off of it, stressing people out for stuff that doesn't even matter in the end of the day. It's right. pretty amazing.
And yeah, I think parenting probably was hard no matter what.
Right.
No one teaches you how to respond to your 16-year-old having a temper tantrum, nor do they tell you how to do that with your 3-year-old, right? But I think what I see as if I had to pick the one thing I just wish parents wouldn't do is compare their kids to other kids. And whether it's comparing your own kids to each other or talking about your cousin who got into this or that. And I think there's a healthy way. I think that it often comes from parents as trying to encourage, like, hey, your cousin got into blah, blah. Isn't that great? And it's coming from a place of love. But for kids, what they hear is,
I'm not good enough.
Your love for me is tied up in my achievement.
Of
And if that's how kids feel, then it's like a setup. You inevitably that you will disappoint your parents, and that's a lot of pressure for a little person who has not yet matured yet.
All of our trauma comes from what our parents said and didn't do, and what they did, and what, right? Like, it's all, as we grow up and we become more aware and we learn about our triggers and why we do what we do, it's like, oh, it's because my dad didn't say I love you enough, or we got compared, or we got, right, our friend did something epic and we didn't get the credit for that, or what have you. So those adolescent ages are so important in how we form our perspective of the world and our community.
Oh, totally. And I think, yeah. And I think what we start to realize after a while is everybody I know was traumatized by their parents.
All of them.
And we all had great parents. Yeah. Everybody I know has got something that, like, oh, my parent said this, and this is why I'm weird about this or that or whatever. And
it's so
I had
true.
Great parents.
So true.
And there are things that I'm like, this is why I don't do that, or I do that. Yeah.
And I know that you now bring in universities to talk about this subject of, like, what's important now to the universities and what's not important, right? What do you know, and I know that Simon Sinek puts out a lot of content about this in terms of how employers are responsible for this generation and coaching and training and building them up versus, let's say, the industrial age, where you fit into a cubicle and you did a job and you check the box, and is a very different age of employment than it is today. So there's definitely a responsibility that employers have. What would you communicate to employers who want to bring in young talent and foster that young talent, and maybe things that we don't understand about these kids, to help us be better managers or better leaders, and to really foster that light in them to make them productive employees or teammates?
That's a great question. I think that kids who are graduating, high school kids right now, they're different. I kind of hate it when people are like, oh, they're so different than we are, this whatever group, the millennials, the Gen X, the whatever. But I think that these kids, they learned differently than I did, probably you did. They are probably more creative. They are more adaptable in many ways. They can consume a whole bunch of information and mess through it, find their way through it, which I think is different. But they also don't need to concentrate the same way we did. When I grew up, I had a desk, and that's where I did my homework. And there was no TV, there was no radio, there was nothing on. And sometimes I still think, well, that's how people concentrate. They need it quiet, and they need a
space, and
they need area. Right. And these kids don't. They have grown up learning with an earbud in their ear and their laptop on their couch, and their classrooms are noisy and collaborative. And I think sometimes they don't have the same ability to focus for long periods of time, which is different than I think kids used to be able to do. But I don't know that it's bad.
Sure.
It's just different. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I'm in a school. The employees I have, the teachers I have, range from 22 to 65. And the difference in what they expect from me as a boss, from each other, from the district, is different. And I used to kind of fight that, like, these younger teachers, they don't, whatever. They don't, they want vacation. They don't want to blah, 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 whatever it is. They value their free time, their balance, or whatever. But it's sort of like you can fight them or you can join them.
That's right.
Or at least try to exploit or encourage or empower the positive things that they bring that may be different.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really inspired by this generation because they grew up in a whole different world than we did. And they have skill sets and tools and access I mean, we have that same access, but they're almost like bred into it. You know, I think about like my kids will not know so many things that we knew. They just won't, it will not be part of their vocabulary because it just will not exist anymore. And, you know, we're talking about getting it. I hear so much at work now of employees or teammates talk about their kids talking about some NFT or metaverse or something, and they're like mind blown. I'm like, no, these kids are going to create the next future, and they know so much and they have access to so much, and which is why I really wanted to have you on the podcast today, not because like, you know, let's talk about high school math only, but really I think it's really important to identify what you're talking about, which is, you know, there's some of this stuff that really does matter in you maturing as an adult, right? Like being disciplined, working hard, having work ethic, like striving for goals, being like taking care of yourself, sleeping, all that stuff. But that doesn't change. And the only thing that changes around you could be technology or your environment. And I just noticed so many times people get stuck in the box, right? I've talked to you about that. And like we get stuck in the box because we think that the school system or jobs keep us in this box, but life like does not care. It just kicks us by the wayside regardless. And those skill sets that we learn beyond what's happening in math class or what's happening in history class or whatever is really what I think people need to get out of school. And I went to a business school where we actually learned a lot about collaboration and teamwork. At that time in high school, that wasn't as big, like real deep teamwork types of projects. Like we'd work in groups, but not like group focused. But I mean, everything now happens in teams, right? So like, how do you work with people who all have cell phones? And I think there's this, so that was sorry for that rant.
I mean,
but
no, it's totally true though. I think when you were in high school, I think I had kids in groups, but I think I was maybe one of, especially as a math teacher, that was not what people were doing. And now almost every classroom is set up in groups. Like there is not the kids real. And at that time that you were in high school, when I first came to Northwood, there was a lot of pushback on that. Like, my kid's going to get a group grade. And what if there's a dummy in there who brings them down, you know, all those kinds of things. And now, I think that's a huge shift in education, is almost everything they do is a huge focus of what we're doing is trying to build a sense of community in a classroom and expecting kids to work as a class together and to learn together and definitely work in groups together. And kids have to be taught that, to be honest. You know, they have to learn to listen to somebody else, to disagree appropriately, to have quality, productive discourse. And our teachers spend a lot of time trying to get them to do that because it does not come natural.
No, it doesn't. And what I learned is it ends up being, we learn that in work, and it's really difficult for people to learn how to have all those things you just mentioned because we're not trained to do that until we're 25.
Right.
And it's here to stay, and it's not going away.
Yeah. And it should be more productive, not just at work, but absolutely in communities. And goodness knows we could all use a little like coming together and trying to solve problems instead of trying to one up one another, which is a political commentary I don't think we need to go into. But I do think that, you know, you refer to the competitiveness, like when you were in high school, there's some of that that's really healthy and appropriate, but I don't think that kids have to learn that their best learning doesn't have to come at the expense of other kids learning. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can learn and also be part of a learning community. And I think this is where it should translate to better employable skills. That's the best kind of person you want in your job, right? As an employer, there's a level of competitiveness between your employees that maybe is okay, right? Because you want somebody to work a little bit harder. You're trying to get more out of them. But the bigger goal is to get them to all work for the good of the organization. And if you have just a bunch of competitive employees, that's no good. You need them to be almost competitive in the best way to approach the mission or overall vision for that company. And for me, that's learning for kids. But it takes some doing, and it requires to have meaningful tasks and activities for kids to do that weren't working in a group too. Like just opening your textbook and doing math problems in a group is not.
What is your opinion of kids who don't want to go to college anymore? Who feel like, the world is different. There's opportunity for me to go to YouTube University or learn everything I want to do and become an entrepreneur or start my own little business. I mean, high school is a little different because of how the government supports, public schools, but the days of spending $60,000 to $80,000 to go to university to then become a clerk, like those days, it's very inequitable, if you will. And the conversation of people not going to college anymore is really big. So tell me about what you see in that discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that a lot of things about that. I think, college, university life itself is different than it used to be. I mean, that's another complicating factor to parents' anxiety about the next step for kids is I read a book and it talked about in the old days, colleges used to be about going to school and living in some crappy dorm, eating terrible food, but having this sort of academic awakening. It's where you became an adult and you learned how to learn and really think and all these things. And now universities are different. And probably because they have to be, but they're business too. So they market and they have great dorms and huge athletic facilities and all these kind of bells and whistles that I think make the very traditional academics question the experience. And they've also become really expensive. And if you really dive into the inequity of kids who can and cannot afford it, and I mean, heightened by that whole industry we're talking about preparing for college or preparing for the next level of whatever, there are lots of kids in this country and in the world who cannot afford that. And it just continues to create a division between the haves and the have-nots, because it's not realistic for all kids to be able to prepare at the same way. That's why colleges are moving away from things like ACT and SAT, because the prep business was
making money off of that.
Yeah, not just making money off of it, but it was hard to discern. You prepped, I didn't. How did this? I can't make really any meaning of that score when the SAT used to be like an aptitude test. The whole point of it was like, what's your aptitude? And now, if my parents can afford me to put me in 3 years of SAT prep, of course I'm going to do better than some kid who walks in and just takes the test. But going to college, there are lots of people who are very successful who don't go to college. If I was a parent of a high school kid, would I ever tell them that was an option? I don't know that I would, because maybe that's my own fear of like, oh, you have to have something to fall back on. But lots of people do great things and don't go to college. I guess I wish that kids would at least consider like going to do some kind of technical training, and kind of gone are those days where kids go and apprentice and become plumbers and electricians.
Those days are gone too in the United States.
And we need them. And we need them badly, good quality people who do that kind of work, and you can make a really good living doing it.
It's ironic.
I suppose it always comes down to motivation, right? Like, why do you not want to go to college? Is it because it's not the right time for you in your life, or you don't think there's no value in it? I don't know. I think there's still lots of companies and people who, if you're going to work for somebody, who still do value a degree.
Yeah, I agree. I think intention matters. I think as long as you're asking the right questions and not doing it just because everyone else is telling you to do it. I think now, because I think there was, many years ago, like we didn't have the level of access to information and online courses, and the education,
Right.
the online education business was not as big back then. So,
Right.
back then it was like, well, that's the default. Today, it doesn't necessarily need to be a default. It should and can be a choice.
Totally. And I think that it's easy to get swept up in college is very expensive, and it is.
Yeah.
Four-year colleges are very expensive, but there are also really good, more affordable options like community college and state schools that have worked hard to make college accessible. I mean, California itself is a state that has remained committed to public community college and state schools, state universities, because it is an equalizing, it should help equalize some of that socioeconomic divide. And so kids can access it, but some kids also aren't ready and they need to do something else first, or it's not their thing. So, or some kids have a brilliant idea in high school and go off and make $1 million as an entrepreneur with something they started when they were 17. I mean, how do you know? And none of us could decide for somebody else.
Yeah, well, you have a really tough job, and I really honor you for committing your life to the work you do and all the people that are in your ecosystem. I mean, it's why I've kept in touch with you for so many years, because people need to appreciate all of those people in their life that had that little impact. And it really does define sort of how we operate and how we think and how we interact with the world. And it all goes full circle at some point.
It does. It does go full circle. I think the greatest compliment to any educator is when you have a graduate like you.
Thank you.
I mean, it really, somebody who is thoughtful about the world and their community and cares enough to share with others and bring people together. It's a really big deal. And when you're working at a high school, you're hoping for that, but you don't really know.
Yeah.
If you're doing the right things until kids grow up and keep in touch or don't keep in touch. Everybody should keep in touch with their teachers. At least let them know how you are. It's a big deal for us because it's so awesome. Our life's work.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, I just super appreciate you and honor you. And I'm really glad you said yes to doing this, even though you thought we'd have nothing to talk about. And look, we recorded an entire episode. I hope you're well. Thank you so much for doing this with me, and continue to do the good work. I know the entire community and America is behind all of you guys, and really just appreciate all the work you guys are doing. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.